In 1996, a billionaire's daughter vanished without a trace. But 7 years later, her old tape recorder started playing a message he never recorded. What it said froze his blood. The sun shimmered on the surface of Lake Aldridge, that warm June afternoon in 1996. It was the kind of summer day where the air buzzed with cicadas, and the smell of pine hung thick over the water. Randall Cambridge, a 32-year-old tech billionaire, had taken a rare day off to bring his 6-year-old daughter, Tallulah, to their family's secluded lake house in upstate Washington. The lake, surrounded by dense forest and steep bluffs, was one of the few places where Randall felt he could breathe, away from boardrooms and flashing cameras. Tallulah was the light of his life. Born with curious gray eyes and an infectious laugh, she had a habit of talking to inanimate objects like they were her secret friends. Her favorite possession was a red cassette tape recorder, bulky, scratched, and decorated with glittery star stickers. She called it Mr. Echo. Randall had given it to her on her 5th birthday, and since then, she carried it everywhere, recording conversations, songs, and her imaginary stories. That day, Randall sat on the wraparound porch, typing on his laptop, and occasionally glancing toward the wooden dock where Tallulah played. She was kneeling at the edge, legs crossed, barefoot, holding the recorder close to her mouth. Every so often, she would pause to look at the trees or wave to the water, as if it were listening too. "Daddy, I'm making a story about a dragon that lives under the lake," she called to him without turning around. Randall smiled. "Make sure he's a friendly dragon." "He's misunderstood," she replied with a dramatic tone. A few minutes later, Randall's phone rang. It was an investor from Tokyo, someone he couldn't afford to ignore. He stepped inside, closing the glass door behind him but keeping a clear view of the dock. Tallulah was still there, her head bobbing as she narrated into the recorder. It was only a 15-minute call. When he hung up, he returned to the porch and froze. The dock was empty. At first, Randall assumed she'd wandered into the trees or gone back inside without him noticing. He checked every room in the house. Nothing. He called her name, loud and sharp. No answer. Panic crept into his voice as he began to run toward the water's edge, scanning for ripples, toys, anything. Floating near the dock, tangled in reeds, was the red cassette recorder. He waded into the lake, grabbed it, and hit rewind with shaking fingers. It was soaked, but somehow the tape still moved. He pressed play, a burst of static. Then her voice, soft and clear. "Daddy, I think I see the dragon." And then silence. Police, divers, dogs, helicopters, all came. Randall offered $1 million reward, then 5. Nothing. No footprints, no blood, no sign of struggle. It was as if she had been plucked from the earth. That night, Randall sat alone in her room, holding the red recorder to his chest like a heartbeat. He played the tape over and over, searching for something, anything in the background. A splash, a voice, a breath. But there was only that final sentence. "I think I see the dragon." Tallulah Cambridge was declared missing, presumed drowned, but her body was never found. And Randall, once the face of innovation and ambition, disappeared from the public eye. He never believed she was dead. Not truly. 7 years had passed. The lake house stood abandoned, cloaked in moss and shadows. Randall Cambridge hadn't returned since the day Tallulah vanished. He couldn't. Every board creaked like her footsteps. Every breeze whispered her name. Instead, he buried himself in a fortress of glass and steel, his penthouse high above Seattle, where memory couldn't ambush him in the trees or float up from the water. But he kept one thing close, the red cassette recorder, Mr. Echo. It sat on the top shelf of a glass cabinet, in the same plastic bag the investigators had sealed it in. The glittery star stickers had begun to peel. The battery door was cracked. Randall had never replaced it. Not once. And yet, every year, on the exact day and hour of her disappearance, he brought the recorder down, placed it on his desk, and pressed play. It had become a ritual, a painful one. He would listen to Tallulah's final words, "Daddy, I think I see the dragon," and then sit for hours, letting silence eat away at him. His therapist said it was self-harm disguised as hope. His lawyers called it obsession. But Randall didn't care. It was the last real piece of her. And something in his bones told him the tape still mattered. This year, it was different. June 14th, 2003, just past noon. Randall sat in his study, blinds drawn, the city muffled outside. He slid the cassette into the recorder with trembling hands, as he had every year. He pressed play. Static buzzed. The familiar hum of old magnetic tape. And then, something impossible. A voice. "If you can hear this, Daddy, I'm alive." Randall's heart stopped. The tape hissed. The sound quality was shaky, muffled, but the voice was unmistakable. Older, hoarse, but hers, Tallulah. "They're watching. I don't have much time. Please, find me." "I'm not far." Then static returned. The tape spun to an end. Randall stared at the recorder like it had grown teeth. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, in a blur of motion, he rewound the tape and played it again. And again. Every time, the same voice, the same plea. He ran to his safe, pulled out a duplicate of the original cassette, one the forensic team had digitized years ago. He played it side by side, no message. Just, "Daddy, I think I see the dragon." No voice from the future, no plea, nothing. His blood went cold. The message on the tape had not been there before. He spent the next 4 hours scanning the recorder, opening it with a jeweler's kit, checking for modifications. Nothing. It was the same busted plastic device it had always been. He tested it with a blank cassette. Normal behavior. No tricks. No interference. He brought in an audio engineer from the University of Washington. The man listened with headphones, then analyzed the file on spectral software. Randall watched as colorful waves spread across the monitor. The engineer frowned. This recording, it's fresh," he said. "Less than 2 months old. I don't know how that's possible unless someone recorded over the tape." "No one has touched it," Randall said, jaw tight. "It's been sealed in a display case for years." The engineer shook his head. "Then, I don't have an explanation." But Randall did. Somehow, somewhere, Tallulah had found a way to speak, and she was still out there, alive. Randall didn't sleep that night. He paced his study, retracing the timeline of Tallulah's disappearance for the 1,000th time. Every step she took, every sound she might have heard, every path she could have wandered, he saw it all behind his eyes. But the question had changed now. It wasn't about how she vanished. It was about how her voice had returned. By morning, he had made up his mind. If Tallulah's message was real, and in his gut he knew it was, then she was trying to reach him. And that meant she was close enough to risk sending a message. That meant she was somewhere someone thought no one would look. Somewhere she was being hidden. The background noise in the new recording hadn't escaped him. Between her breathless words, there was the faint creak of old wood, the distant whine of a pipe, and something else, barely audible unless you knew what to listen for. A rhythmic clicking like chalk tapping a board. He played the tape again and again, isolating frequencies using an audio program the engineer had installed on his laptop. Then he closed his eyes and imagined the sound. Old floors, pipe whine, chalk, a school, not a modern one, not polished linoleum and bright lights, but an older building, perhaps abandoned, perhaps repurposed. Somewhere silent. Somewhere you could keep children and no one would hear them scream. Randall pulled up a map of the Pacific Northwest and began marking locations. Every closed, condemned, or forgotten girls' school within 300 miles. Then he widened the search to include orphanages, reformatory schools, and faith-based shelters that had been decommissioned or investigated for abuse. By noon, he had a list of 32 locations. By evening, 15 had been ruled out by satellite imagery or confirmed demolition. That left 17. 17 places where someone could be hiding children, and maybe one where Tallulah was. He made calls to former security consultants, people from his tech firm who had moved into private intelligence. He brought in Sable Knox, a former CIA field analyst turned surveillance specialist. She was blunt, sharp-eyed, and completely unshaken by the story. "This could be nothing," she warned, "or it could be the real thing. Either way, we checked them all." Randall didn't respond. His eyes were locked on a photo. Tallulah, 5 years old, grinning in front of the lake, holding Mr. Echo like it was a living thing. They began the search the next morning. The first location was an abandoned Catholic school outside Spokane. It had been closed since 1979. They found graffiti, raccoon bones, and mold, but nothing else. The second, a Lutheran girls' home in Oregon, had been turned into a winery. They crossed off 4 more in 2 days. Then they came to the 15th location. It was listed in state archives as Maryvale Home for Girls, but local records showed it was never officially registered. It had burned partially in 1984, and ownership passed into a shell company that hadn't filed taxes in 20 years. It sat on the outskirts of Wheeler, Idaho, at the edge of a dense pine wood. The main road leading in had been washed out by a landslide years ago. Randall and Sable had to approach on foot, climbing over fallen trees and ducking through underbrush. When they finally saw it, Randall felt his stomach knot. The building was enormous, 4 stories tall, with brick blackened in places by old smoke damage. Ivy crawled up the windows, but the grounds, they were trimmed, not overgrown, maintained. Someone was still using the place. Sable's instincts kicked in instantly. "Don't move," she whispered, crouching behind a fallen tree. "There are fresh tire tracks in the dirt and motion sensors on the fence line." Randall's pulse pounded in his ears. "Are they watching?" he whispered. She scanned the windows through binoculars. "Not yet, but they've got infrared cameras mounted under the eaves. Someone's protecting this place. A school that didn't exist on paper. Still active, still guarded. No signs, no children outside, and no lights in the windows, just the slow, empty hum of something buried." They retreated and set up surveillance from a ridge 2 miles out. That night, under the veil of darkness, Sable captured thermal images through a long-range scope. Inside the building were moving figures, small, hunched, some grouped together. Children, at least 8, maybe more. One of them, Randall knew in his bones, was Tallulah. He could feel it like a current under his skin. She was here, and she had found a way to call him. They waited until 3:12 a.m., the coldest, quietest part of the night, before approaching the building again. From the ridge, the Maryvale structure looked like a corpse of what it once had been, but now Randall could see subtle signs of life. There was a soft, unnatural glow in a basement window, shielded by blackout curtains, but still leaking around the edges. A humming sound filled the air, steady and mechanical, as if something deeper underground was running on backup generators. Sable moved like a shadow ahead of him, her compact frame almost invisible in the dense pine. Randall followed in a crouch, breath shallow. His body screamed with exhaustion, but adrenaline drowned it out. For the first time in 7 years, his daughter was within reach. They skirted the fence using a blind spot in the sensor coverage that Sable had identified. She clipped the wire with surgical precision and led them around the back of the building to what looked like a coal chute, bolted from the outside but rusted through at the hinges. After 10 minutes of silent work, they pried it open and descended into blackness. The basement air was thick with damp rot and chemical cleaner. The floor beneath them squished faintly, like old carpet soaked through. They moved through long hallways lit by flickering bulbs, walls lined with dusty books, cracked mirrors, and outdated medical posters. It was part school, part clinic, and something else. Randall saw tiny shoes lined up outside a room, 8 pairs, all the same size. In the corner of the corridor, there was a door with a keypad lock. Sable examined it quickly. "Old model. I can short it." Before she did, Randall's gaze drifted toward another door, unlocked, slightly ajar. The faint glow of fluorescent light bled out from within. He pushed it open slowly. Inside was a large room filled with steel-framed bunk beds, each with a thin gray blanket. 7 girls lay asleep, their small forms rising and falling rhythmically. No sound but their breathing and the soft whir of an oscillating fan. And there, on the far left bed, half covered by the blanket, was a red object, the tape recorder. Mr. Echo. Randall's vision blurred as he stepped forward, every nerve in his body screaming to run, but held in place by disbelief. He reached the edge of the bed. The girl lying there was turned away from him, dark curls resting on a flat pillow. She looked older, thinner, harder, but familiar. He reached out, gently touched her shoulder. She flinched, then turned slowly. Their eyes met. At first, she looked through him, expression blank, trained to expect cruelty. Then, in a sudden collapse of restraint, her face crumpled. Her lips parted in a whisper. "Daddy?" Randall sank to his knees, unable to speak. Tallulah threw herself into his arms shaking, voice catching on words that hadn't been used in years. I thought you were just a dream." I kept talking to the tape, but I didn't think. He held her tightly, sobs silently racking his chest. Sable stood at the door, jaw clenched, scanning the hallway for movement. Tallulah pulled away just slightly, her hands trembling against his face. I sent the message. I snuck into the control room while they were changing shifts. I had to. How long have you been here? He asked, brushing the hair from her face. Since I was 6, since the lake. She looked past him at the other beds. These girls, they don't have names anymore, just numbers. I'm 412, but I remember who I am. I remembered you. I recorded a message every year. I didn't think any would get out. Randall swallowed the ache in his throat. I heard you, and now I'm taking you home. Sable cut in, voice sharp. We have a problem. There's movement on the second floor. Armed. Military stance. Randall stood, pulling Tallulah close. We're not leaving the others. She shook her head. We can't wake them all without being heard. But I can get them ready. Just give me 5 minutes. Please. Sable handed her a small flashlight. Make it 3. Tallulah went bed to bed like a ghost, whispering, nudging shoulders, calming them. The girls obeyed her without question. This was a code, a system. They had done this before, drills perhaps. She was their leader. By the time footsteps thundered down the stairs, the girls were hidden beneath the floorboards of the adjacent utility room, a secret Tallulah had found years ago. Randall and Sable crouched with them, breath held, as boots stormed through the corridor and slammed open doors. A man's voice barked commands. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Eventually, the footsteps retreated. Tallulah reached into her shirt and pulled out a small metal key, flat and scratched. She handed it to Randall. There's a room downstairs with files, pictures, names, proof. They keep it under lock. That key opens it. Randall stared at it. How do you know that? She looked him in the eye. Because I wasn't always in this room. He didn't ask more. They would take the files. They would take the children. And they would burn this place to the ground. But not yet. Not until every last name had a voice again. They waited until dawn. Hidden beneath the floorboards of the utility room, the air was tight and stale. The younger girls huddled close, some too frightened to speak, others whispering softly in languages Randall couldn't recognize. Tallulah remained calm, watching the narrow slit of light between the boards, like a soldier trained for war. Her fingers never left the old recorder clutched to her chest. She hadn't let go of it since they found her. Randall sat beside her, one hand resting on her back, the other gripping the small metal key she had given him hours earlier. His mind raced. He wanted to ask her everything. What they had done to her. How they'd taken her from the lake. Why she never appeared in any database or police report. But now wasn't the time. Not yet. Survival first. Answers later. At precisely 6:04 a.m., Sable tapped her watch twice. Their signal. Time to move. They emerged from the crawlspace like ghosts. Randall helped the children climb out one by one while Sable stood guard at the hallway entrance, firearm in hand, her jaw clenched and steady. The building was quiet, but not empty. Somewhere above, Randall could hear distant metallic clanging and the low hum of machinery. The girls had described guards, uniformed men and women with cold eyes who rarely spoke and never removed their gloves. They came at night. They took some girls to testing. Some returned, some didn't. Tallulah led them swiftly down a different corridor. It was narrow and lined with half-covered portraits of stern nuns and government officials long dead. At the end stood a thick iron door with an electronic lock, its keypad scratched and dented, as though someone had once tried to pry it open by force. Randall inserted the key. It clicked. Inside was a narrow archive room, steel cabinets from floor to ceiling. A flickering fluorescent bulb swung overhead, casting long, twitching shadows. The air reeked of mildew and dust. Files were arranged by number, not names. Each drawer labeled with 3-digit codes. Tallulah moved with purpose, going directly to the cabinet marked 400-499. She pulled out folders one after another, flipping them open, then handing them to Randall. Black and white photos, medical charts, psychological assessments, genetic codes. Every child was tracked, cataloged, reduced to data points. Many had been taken at birth, some abducted. Others donated from corrupt orphanages in foreign countries. But Tallulah's file, 412, was different. It was twice as thick as the others. Her original name was redacted in every spot except one. A single photo remained paperclipped to the top, a candid shot from the lake house dock, likely taken moments before her disappearance. Randall's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. There were notes in the margins, terms like resistance minimal, memory separation successful, linguistic mimicry high functioning. There were timestamps from when she had been relocated, stabilized, and transferred to Tier B. It was clinical, detached, and monstrous. They experimented on you, he whispered. Tallulah nodded slowly, eyes blank. Sometimes, not always needles. Sometimes they just talked to us, made us say things over and over, told us who we were supposed to be, then made us forget the rest. Randall had to force down a wave of nausea. He couldn't afford to lose control, not here. Sable pulled several hard drives from a locked drawer, packing them into a steel case. We'll take these. They're probably encrypted, but someone in DC can crack them. With these files, we don't just expose the facility, we burn their entire network. Suddenly, a sharp clunk echoed through the hallway outside. Randall froze. Sable raised her weapon. That came from the east stairwell. We have to go. Now. Tallulah moved with urgency, helping the other girls organize into pairs. No one left alone, no one behind. They moved quickly through the maze of corridors, taking an alternate route Sable had scoped earlier, but as they reached the basement exit, voices shouted above. The guards had discovered the missing children, and they were coming. Go! Randall yelled, helping push the children through the coal chute they'd entered through hours earlier. One by one, they scrambled into the woods, led by Tallulah and a few older girls. Sable stayed to cover the rear, firing 2 shots at a guard who appeared at the stairwell landing, non-lethal, but enough to force retreat. Randall was the last to leave, dragging the file box with him. They ran through the forest for 2 miles, feet slamming against wet leaves and tangled roots. Tallulah never let go of the smallest girl's hand. The recorder bounced at her side like a metronome, every step pounding in rhythm with the beating of Randall's heart. When they reached the edge of the highway, 2 black SUVs were waiting. Sable's extraction team. They piled in quickly. Doors slammed. Tires screamed against asphalt as they peeled away toward a secure airstrip 20 minutes south. Randall sat in the back seat with Tallulah resting against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. The other girls were silent, their eyes wide, staring at trees flying past the windows, like ghosts they were leaving behind. We're safe, he whispered into her hair. I've got you now. I'm never letting go. But in the front seat, Sable's voice was cold. They'll come after her, Randall. Not just her, you. This place wasn't run by amateurs. This was black budget level. Government, or worse. You stole their property. Randall looked down at his daughter. Tired, bruised, but alive. Then let them come, he said quietly. They'll find out what it feels like to lose everything. The safe house was nestled deep in the Cascades, an unmarked structure built into the mountainside, owned by a defense contractor who owed Randall Cambridge more than a few favors. Hidden from satellite view, shielded from electronic surveillance, and guarded by former military operatives on a rotating shift, it was one of the only places in the world where Randall felt his daughter might finally sleep in peace. But peace didn't come easy. Tallulah hadn't spoken much since the escape. She stayed close to Randall, often trailing him silently from room to room, like a shadow too afraid to separate from its source. She flinched at sudden noises, barely touched her food, and recoiled at the sight of mirrors. Randall watched helplessly, unsure how to reach her. He had her back, but parts of her soul still felt trapped in that place. She kept the tape recorder with her at all times. Randall would find her sitting by the window, staring out at the pine trees, recording softly under her breath. Sometimes it was fragments of memory, other times nonsense stories, fairy tales with broken timelines, as if her mind were sorting pieces of a shattered puzzle. But most often it was just one phrase, repeated in 1,000 quiet tones. Don't forget who you are. He'd sit next to her, not pressing, not asking questions, just listening. Sometimes, when the sky turned orange in the evening, she'd lean into him and whisper, "Do you remember the dragon, Daddy?" And he'd answer yes, even though it hurt more every time. While she recovered in silence, Randall and Sable were waging a silent war. The hard drives taken from Maryvale were turned over to a private intelligence group based in Zurich, one that specialized in decrypting data scraped from compromised military black sites. The files confirmed their worst fears. Maryvale was not an isolated operation. It was one of 6 covert child processing facilities scattered across the U.S. and Eastern Europe, all funded through a black channel masked as humanitarian development grants. The network was called Project Larkspur. Randall learned that Tallulah had been a Category A subject because of her genetic profile. Her brainwave patterns and rare auditory memory had made her a candidate for neurolinguistic imprinting. They had been training her to be a field asset. The reason she hadn't been terminated after 7 years of non-compliance was simple. She was the only one whose recordings sometimes bled into other frequencies. Randall barely understood it, but one file described her voice as capable of resonant emotional disruption. She could speak words in a tone that bypassed cognition and triggered reactions in the emotional brain. That's why her message got through. That's why he heard it. She hadn't just sent a cry for help, she had reached him. Sable wanted to move them again, to a more remote location, but Randall refused. If we keep running, they'll keep chasing. The only way to end this is in daylight. He organized a private press conference in Seattle. It was bold, dangerous, reckless, but calculated. Randall stood on stage with a single manila folder. No children, no files, no faces. Only enough proof to send a ripple through Congress and trigger an internal investigation. He mentioned Project Larkspur by name. He said the word Maryvale. He asked why the Department of Health had unaccounted for funding. He asked why dozens of girls in state custody had disappeared with no case files, no family history, no DNA logged. He didn't accuse. He just asked, and that's what made it lethal. By the next morning, 3 senators had issued statements. 2 investigative journalists began digging. One retired general gave an anonymous interview, claiming that Larkspur had been quietly dismantled in 2001. Or so we thought. But behind the cameras, pressure was building. One night, a drone flew within 40 feet of the safe house perimeter. It was shot down before it could capture anything. But its origin was military grade. The message was clear: we're watching. Sable doubled the security team. Tallulah was moved to the deepest room in the structure. No windows, concrete walls, a panic lock on the inside. But she didn't complain. She only asked for one thing. "Can I have paint?" Randall didn't question it. He had a dozen colors brought in. She covered the walls slowly, methodically. Trees, a lake, a dragon curling beneath the surface, a house with a porch, and a girl with curly hair, sitting on a dock, holding a red cassette recorder. Each day she added a detail. And one morning, Randall walked in and found she had painted herself and him, side by side. They were holding hands. She didn't say anything. But when he knelt beside her and touched the image, she turned and whispered, "I remember you." And this time, she smiled. Not a forced one. Not a learned reaction. A real, quiet smile. The kind a child gives a parent when they finally feel safe again. That night, Randall stood by her door long after she had fallen asleep. Mr. Echo was beside her pillow, still humming faint static. He stared at the painted dragon across the wall and whispered to himself, "We're not just surviving anymore, Tally. We're coming back." And he meant it. The storm finally came, not of weather, but of force. It began just after midnight. Sable was reviewing satellite activity when the warning came through. A foreign signal piggybacking on an encrypted Department of Defense frequency had pinged near their location. It was brief, under 3 seconds, but precise. Whoever was behind it had triangulated the coordinates. They were no longer just observing. They were preparing to strike. Sable ordered a full lockdown. Steel shutters clamped over every window. Internal lighting switched to red. Emergency power engaged. Armed personnel, 10 of them, moved into defensive positions across all levels of the safe house. Randall didn't panic. He went to Tallulah's room first. She had already sensed it. Her eyes were open, watching the red light pulse across the ceiling like a heartbeat. She sat up and reached for her recorder automatically, gripping it with white-knuckled fingers. "It's happening, isn't it?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. Randall nodded. "But you're not alone this time." Tallulah stood up, pulled on her hoodie, and followed him. Down the hallway, the other rescued girls, now under protective custody, were being ushered into the inner chamber. It was a narrow, lead-lined vault behind three security doors, stocked with food, water, blankets, and enough air supply to last for days. Sable met Randall at the tactical station, her eyes scanning the live feed from drone surveillance. A convoy was coming, 4 black unmarked trucks, headed up the logging road that hadn't been used in over 20 years. No license plates, no insignia. They're not law enforcement, she said. These are mercs, private ex-special forces, and they're coming fast. Randall clenched his jaw. Then, let's give them something they didn't plan for. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks. From the beginning, Randall knew exposure wasn't enough. Evil adapted. It hid, changed faces, but humiliation, that left scars. And so he had created a trap, digital, legal, and psychological. While Zurich decrypted the hard drives, Randall's tech team built a hidden broadcast network, designed to go live the moment he activated a specific sequence. It would upload the contents of Project Larkspur, everything, the locations, the names, the scientists, the funding trails, to servers in over 30 countries. It would send copies to every major news outlet, UN subcommittees, and child protection agencies across the globe. But the upload could only be triggered manually, from within the safe house. And Randall had placed it right inside Tallulah's recorder. Mr. Echo was no longer just a toy. It was a detonator. They want to erase what they did, Randall said, kneeling in front of his daughter. But if they get in, I want the world to hear you. Tallulah stared at him. You want me to press it? He nodded. Only if they breach the vault. Only if we can't stop them. She looked down at the recorder. It buzzed faintly in her hands, like it knew. Then she gave a single, quiet nod. The trucks reached the outer perimeter at 1:22 a.m. Infrared cameras caught the silhouettes of 12 men moving through the woods, tactically spaced, armed with suppressed weapons. 2 stayed behind with jammers. The rest advanced in formation. Sable waited until they breached the outer gate before triggering the defense grid. A series of mines, non-lethal, flash, and shockwave, detonated across the trail, scattering them. One fell. Another screamed, temporarily blinded, but the rest pressed forward. These were professionals. They had planned for resistance, but they hadn't planned for Tallulah. At 1:41 a.m., the lead intruder reached the lower stairwell. Sable's team engaged. Precision fire, rubberized rounds, smoke grenades. Chaos exploded across the monitors. Randall stayed in the control room, watching, directing, praying. Then, the unthinkable happened. The eastern wall, once thought solid, shuddered under an impact. A specialized breaching device had been used. A section of the reinforced steel cracked open, just enough for 2 men to slide through. One of them reached the hallway outside the inner vault. Tallulah was sitting alone, cross-legged, facing the door. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She pressed the red button on her recorder. A sharp beep echoed inside the vault. The upload began. All across the world, dormant servers flickered to life. Every document, every photo, every medical report released. Randall saw it on the screen. Larkspur files, worldwide sync, active. The man outside the door must have realized what she'd done. He raised his weapon, and then a shot rang out. Sable appeared from the hallway behind, dropping him instantly. She rushed to Tallulah, scooping her into her arms, dragging her back into the safe zone just as the vault door slammed shut with a seismic clank. They were safe, but it was over. 36 hours later, headlines exploded. Shocking child experimentation ring linked to private U.S. contractors. Black site called Maryvale hosted illegal genetic trials on missing children. Billionaire whistleblower exposes global conspiracy. There were arrests, congressional hearings, public outcry. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows. Funding was frozen. Several implicated officials resigned or vanished entirely. Randall refused all interviews. He gave the credit to his daughter. She was the one who spoke, he told investigators. I just listened. And Tallulah? For the first time since she was 6 years old, she slept through the night. Months passed. The world turned slowly, but differently now, like a great machine resetting itself after a violent tremor. Project Larkspur was no longer a whispered myth in the corners of classified rooms. It was public record, documented, dissected, condemned. Nations formed joint investigations. International courts opened cases. The names of the missing children, those who had vanished without graves, were finally spoken aloud by the powerful. But none of that mattered more than the quiet miracles happening inside a small lakeside house in Washington. The Lake House. Randall had returned there for the first time in over 7 years, not alone, but with Tallulah beside him. It was autumn when they arrived. The trees blazed red and gold along the shoreline, as if the land itself remembered her and welcomed her back. The dock was still there, weathered but standing. Randall had replaced the old boards where Tallulah once sat. The house had been cleaned and restored, but it still smelled faintly of pine, dust, and memory. Tallulah stepped inside slowly, holding Mr. Echo in one hand and brushing her fingertips along the hallway wall with the other. Everything was smaller than she remembered. The ceiling lower, the windows narrower. But the warmth, that hadn't changed. She walked straight to the back room, the one that had been hers. Randall had preserved it exactly as it had been on the day she disappeared. The same butterfly decals on the wall, the same purple blanket on the bed, the same cracked nightlight in the corner. But now, at last, it belonged to her again. Over the next few weeks, healing unfolded not as a single event, but in layers. Slow, messy, human. There were days when she couldn't speak, when the weight of everything pressed so hard against her chest that even laughter felt like betrayal. There were nights when she woke screaming, clawing at invisible restraints, her voice caught in a language that wasn't hers, residue from the scripts they made her memorize. Randall would hold her hand through those nights, whispering the only truth that mattered. You're here. You're free. You're mine. Therapists came and went, carefully selected and trained in trauma beyond textbooks. But it was music that helped her most. Randall had brought in a battered upright piano and placed it near the wide window overlooking the lake. Tallulah, once hesitant, began pressing single keys, then chords, then melodies. She didn't know how she knew some of the songs. They were buried in her fingers. Eventually, she started composing. She called one of her first pieces, The Dragon's Voice. Randall wept the first time he heard it. Outside the house, the world still talked. Documentaries, books, conferences. Reporters begged for interviews. Families of other Larkspur victims wrote letters, asking how he found her, how they could bring their own children home. Randall responded to everyone. He funded a foundation in Tallulah's name, the Echo Initiative, named, of course, after the red tape recorder that had saved them both. Its mission was simple: locate missing children, support recovery, and bring justice. Within 6 months, it had tracked down 12 more victims from the same network. Each time a child was found, Tallulah recorded a message for them. Her voice, once broken, became a lifeline for others. And one day, something strange happened. A letter arrived in a weathered envelope, addressed only with a name, to 412. Tallulah stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a crumpled photograph, 7 girls standing together in the dormitory, arms around each other, smiling weakly toward a camera they weren't supposed to have. On the back, written in uneven block letters, "We remember the dragon. We're safe now." Tallulah held the photo to her chest and cried. That night, she sat on the dock with Randall beside her. The stars glittered above and the lake was still. She looked out at the water, then down at Mr. Echo resting between them. "It was supposed to be just a toy," she said, "but it saved everything." Randall nodded. "Because you believed it would, and because you never stopped speaking." She turned toward him. Her eyes were no longer empty. They shimmered now. Not with sorrow, but with strength. "I want to live, Dad. Really live. Not just survive." He wrapped an arm around her shoulder and kissed her hair. "Then let's do it. Together." In the months that followed, Tallulah enrolled in school, not with bodyguards, not in some hidden institution, but in a small local program where she could walk freely, laugh without fear, and make friends who didn't know her by number. She started wearing bright colors again. She dyed the tips of her hair blue. She wrote poems and read them aloud on open mic nights. And on her 14th birthday, Randall gave her a new tape recorder, sleek, modern, digital. But she smiled, shook her head, and placed it beside Mr. Echo on her shelf. "I'll keep it," she said, "but this one already has everything I need." That night, Randall tucked her in as he once did long ago. And just before he turned out the light, Tallulah whispered something he would carry in his heart for the rest of his life. "Daddy, I'm home, forever this time." And she was. This story, at its core, is not just about a missing child or a powerful man seeking justice. It's about the resilience of the human spirit when it has every reason to break. Tallulah's journey is harrowing, almost unbearably so. Yet her strength is not born from vengeance or rage, but from memory, holding onto a fragment of love, a voice, a connection. That red tape recorder, simple and small, becomes a symbol of defiance, of hope, a voice in the face of dehumanization. Randall, too, transforms. From a man broken by loss into a father who chooses not just to rescue, but to truly listen. His redemption isn't in exposing a conspiracy, but in showing up every day afterward, in the quiet moments, in the healing, in the dockside silences where words no longer need to explain pain. The ending matters because it doesn't pretend that wounds vanish. It honors the complexity of trauma, but insists that love, safety, and chosen joy can grow around those scars, like wildflowers through broken concrete. And in that way, it's not just a story about survival. It's a story about return, about reclaiming identity, about finding your name again when the world tried to erase it. And that, I believe, is the most powerful miracle of all.